I call Squadron Leader Peter D. Carter. You claim you love her.
I do love her.
Would you die for her?
I would, but I'd rather live.
Servus Freunde, my name is Jimmy Cage and it's time to talk about another classic. In the last month I shared my love for 1950s Harvey from the US and 1984's Nausicaä from Japan with you, and now I want to shed a light on a film that's often considered as one of the best British films ever made, 1946's A Matter of Life and Death. A Matter of Life and Death was written and directed by Michael Powell and Emeric Pressburger, one of the most beloved, most influential and most prolific filmmaking partnerships in the history of cinema. Like many other great filmmakers, they weren't always received with such high praise in their time, but revised later on by new generations of film lovers. It is rather seldom that you find two people credited as directors for a film, but if so, more often than not those two are siblings, duos like the Coen brothers, the Russo brothers, the Farrelly brothers or the Wachowskis. But there are exceptions like Phil Lord and Christopher Miller or Powell and Pressburger. They were known as The Archers, which is the name of their production company, and they made a series of highly regarded films in the 1940s and 50s. They collaborated on more than 20 films, and I would totally lie if I said that I'm well versed in their work. So far I've only seen the tip of the iceberg, but the three films that I know I really adore, which are the 1943 epic romantic war film The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, the 1948 musical The Red Shoes, which feature a mesmerizing 15-minute long ballet scene, and the film I'm presenting to you today, the fantasy romance A Matter of Life and Death. What all three movies have in common is their wonderful use of color, Technicolor to be more precise.
When he's starved for Technicolor.
Powell and Pressburger were at the forefront to explore this new artistic expression, and their color films are beautiful and of course highly artificial and stylized marvel to look at. In this film they went one step further and went with the Wizard of Oz routine, telling their story on two different levels in two connected worlds, one in color and one in black and white. Only reversed because in Victor Fleming's film it's the wonderful world of Oz that's presented in lush and vibrant Technicolor, while the real world is shown just in sepia. In A Matter of Life and Death, it's the real physical plane of existence that's shining in all colors of the rainbow, while the other world is in just clean and sharp black and white. That other world can be called heaven, and it is in fact by a very young Richard Attenborough addressed as exactly that.
It's heaven, isn't it?
But the film also humorously states in the opening credits that any resemblance to any other world, known or unknown, is purely coincidental. On a side note though, the film was released in the US under the title Stairway to Heaven, so you have that. And what I found remarkable is that the opening of A Matter of Life and Death shares a slight resemblance to that of Frank Capra's It's a Wonderful Life, which was released in the same year. In both those movies we start somewhere in space with a voice-over narration that leads us to our protagonist. Both films came out at a time where the world just began to recover from World War II. And this is probably just my romantic interpretation as someone who wasn't even born for several more decades, but I always see those openings as some form of kind and warm and maybe protective look down on our little planet Earth. As if after all that murder and destruction, a little bit of peace and quiet came back into the world. Though in the story of A Matter of Life and Death, the war hasn't ended yet. It is May 1945. The end of war in Europe is just a mere days away, and it's not George Bailey we go to, but Peter D. Carter, a British aviator who is just about to crash to his certain death after his plane got shot by the enemy. Peter is played by the British actor David Niven, who I always knew from the first Pink Panther movie, and he's talking over the radio with June, an American radio operator based in England. June is played by the American actress Kim Hunter, who I always knew from her portrayal as Zira in the original Planet of the Apes movies. And the British-American relationship that's established in the first moments is a key theme of the whole film. But more important than that, it's the personal connection that June and Peter instantly build that's the very core of A Matter of Life and Death. They instantly fall in love with one another, certain that Peter won't survive the crash. And if you've seen the MCU film Captain America: The First Avenger, this scene might appear a bit familiar because Joe Johnston very directly pays homage to it in the finale of his film when Steve Rogers is talking to his love Peggy Carter over the radio while he is crashing down as well. A Matter of Life and Death is a film about big feelings, true love that is stronger than death itself. It has melodramatic moments in the very best and truest cinematic meaning of the word, but it also has a very unique and playful humor and an ease to it that is hard to describe. When I try to think what it is about this film that I adore so much and what it is that makes it so special, I would say that it is unlike any other film. Its story and its way of telling that story is so unique and remarkable. It is a story that is told on two different levels. To his own big surprise, Peter isn't killed, but he survived the plane crash and awakened almost uninjured at the shore of England, where he almost instantly runs into the loving arms of June. But before we actually see their reunion or first meeting in person, the film's color images of a still unconscious Peter slowly dissolve to a world that's entirely filmed in black and white. There, his deceased co-pilot is already awaiting his arrival in what seems to be the waiting lobby of a very modernist-appearing heaven. There are new soldiers arriving constantly, and in today's day and age it's hard and also horrible to imagine how many people, young and old, but mostly young, were slaughtered in war each and every day. But this isn't a sad film, it's melancholic for sure, but overall it has a very comforting quality, I think. To be completely honest, I find it rather hard to pinpoint down what a film or filmmakers want to say specifically, if they have a clear-cut message or not. There are very strong themes to be found in the film. The already mentioned relationship between the British and the American, and the film's likely intention to ease the tension between those two nations and appeal to the notion that we need to build a better world together. There's also the conflict between the system, as portrayed by the rather bureaucratic mechanisms and rules of heaven, and the individual on the other side, with its personal needs and feelings. But I don't think the film is that easy to analyze or break down. It incorporates many fascinating elements that one might think about, but at its heart it's also this wonderfully paced flow of images and sounds that you can surrender yourself to. So I'm not saying the film's ambivalence or complexity is a negative at all. As it turns out, Peter's survival has been a mistake, and Conductor 71, played by the wonderfully gleeful Marius Goring, just overlooked him because of the usual bad weather over the English Channel. Now it's up to him to correct that mistake and take Peter back with him. The only problem, Peter has fallen in love with June and doesn't accept that he has to leave because of a mistake that they have made. To solve this misery, he demands an appeal, which he should get later in the film. While that is prepared, he can continue to live on Earth, where we meet another hugely important character in all of this, Dr. Frank Reeves, a good friend of June who is a scientist but also philosopher with a very poetic and humanist nature. He's without a doubt the most fascinating character and becomes the secret protagonist of the film later on. Frank is played by Roger Livesey in his third leading role for The Archers. Now, when I said this story and the way that it's told is so unique, I have to point to the double-sided nature of it. A Matter of Life and Death is clearly a fantastical film, which is underlined by its aesthetic as well as the whole back and forth between the world of the living and the world of the deceased, of course. But at the same time, it opens up this whole other angle about Peter suffering from hallucinations. And more often than not, the film tends to play down the supernatural element and treats the character as if he or she's just imagining things and therefore he's a little bit crazy. But this film doesn't do that. It embraces the fantasy and welcomes it with open arms, and this again is where that comforting feeling comes into effect. Dr. Frank Reeves can be seen as the bridge between those two worlds, and he's taking Peter's medical condition completely serious, and he highlights how important and how powerful the human mind and brain are. And both sides of the story, the operation to cure Peter from his injury, as well as his appeal in heaven, are wonderfully working together, so much so that one could argue everything fantastical really was just in his imagination, but who would want to argue that? And speaking about that appeal, A Matter of Life and Death has the perfect length of lean 104 minutes, and for about 25 minutes it actually turns into a courtroom drama, only that it's not a normal room but an enormously impressive heavenly amphitheater in which Peter's represented representative is fighting his case. It's a giant set piece with hundreds of extras that portray people of many different nations. Though apparently there are no Germans, Italians and Japanese. How surprising. It is at that trial that the film's topic of British-American relations comes to most prominence. The prosecution is led by Abraham Fallon, an American killed by the British in Boston in 1775, and the first jury is entirely made up by representatives of nations that were colonized by Britain. The jury is then replaced by an ethnic diversity of Americans that is much more in line with today's modern society, and again this is where the movie heads towards that new hopeful beginning and better future angle. At least that's what I take away from it. But I definitely want you to experience the film for yourself, and therefore I only want to add one last thing, or rather a couple of short things. In the beginning I addressed that Powell and Pressburger were pioneers when it comes to the use of Technicolor in British cinema. They were also always very engaged in visual storytelling in general, and you will find a lot to cherish in this film. The cinematography and the staging are marvelous, with many expressionistic touches to be found everywhere, from a point of view shot inside the eye of our protagonist that slowly dissolves to the big amphitheater where his destiny is determined. The staging of a game of ping pong with swish pans from left to right and the final freeze in time when the conductor is arriving from heaven, to the creation of a gigantic escalator that connects the two worlds. An escalator so big and memorable that it cost a fortune to build and was so loud to operate that all the dialogue in those scenes had to be added in post. A Matter of Life and Death is a very special film, and I hope you might find it just as fascinating as I do. So in German I'd say, A Matter of Life and Death oder Irrtum im Jenseits, wie er auf Deutsch hieß, ist ein fantastischer, romantischer und einfach unglaublich kreativer Film über die Liebe, den Tod und was es heißt, Mensch zu sein. Powell und Pressburger nutzen Technicolor auf betörende Art und Weise und erzählen eine Geschichte, wie ich sie so noch nie gesehen habe. I give A Matter of Life and Death 9 out of 10. It's more like 8.6, but I don't do that.
But my dear friend, that is just what I do.
Alright, that's it like always. Comment below and let me know what you think about A Matter of Life and Death. And also let me know, are you familiar with the work of Powell and Pressburger, and if so, what is your favorite film? You can hit me up on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram simply at The Jimmy Cage. And if you enjoyed this episode, please give me a thumbs up, share, subscribe, whatever you like, and make sure you hit that bell for all I have to tell.